A big day in courts worldwide. At home, a federal appeals court affirms Microsoft broke antitrust laws, but does not affirm the penalty. Overseas, Milosevic will face justice. The former dictator is shipped out for a war crimes trial. A one-time Republican presidential contender says even he is getting shafted by big oil. And the movie Everyman, everyone loved, remembering Jack Lemmon.
This is the CBS Evening News with Dan Rather reporting from CBS News headquarters in New York.
Good evening. A federal appeals court ruled today in the Microsoft case. It affirmed a lower court finding that Microsoft is guilty of breaking the nation's antitrust laws. But the appeals judges refused to affirm the lower court judge's penalty and remedy, which was to break up Microsoft's giant computer software empire to give competitors a better chance. And the appeals court criticized the lower court judge. All this was a breath of fresh air on Wall Street. The Dow Industrials rose overall 131 points. The Nasdaq gained 50. Microsoft itself gained $1.60, but then slipped back in after-hours trading. CBS News coverage begins with the big court decision and an almost unheard-of rebuke of the judge who handled the original case. Here's CBS News economics correspondent Anthony Mason.
Microsoft executives said it was like the sun had finally broken through.
The ruling lifts the cloud of breakup over the company.
The ruling was unanimous. By a 7-0 vote, the appeals court reversed the breakup of Microsoft. But the Justice Department also declared victory.
I'm pleased to say that the court unanimously found that Microsoft engaged in unlawful conduct.
The appeals court did agree that Microsoft, which controls more than 90% of desktop computer operating systems, had violated antitrust laws by abusing its monopoly. But that was not cause, the court said, for a breakup.
So if I were Bill Gates right now, I'd have to be very happy. He's won on everything that mattered.
The clear loser was Judge Thomas Penfield Jackson, whose public remarks about the case were condemned by the court. In a magazine interview, for example, the judge said Microsoft chairman Bill Gates has a Napoleonic concept of himself and his company, an arrogance which derives from power.
My reactions by no measure are intended to try to suggest that I don't like one side or that I've predetermined the case.
But the appeals court, in removing Jackson from the case, said his remarks seriously tainted the proceedings and called into question the integrity of the judicial process.
A public spanking of this sort is almost unprecedented.
And in many ways, says Prudential's James Lucier, Microsoft itself has already been punished.
Even if the company isn't broken up, I think it has been taught a lesson in that sense. No one can really take antitrust doctrine lightly from now on.
A new judge will now decide what action to take against Microsoft, but the company has already changed many of the business practices that led to the antitrust suit.
So any proscription that comes out of this settlement that will be in the not-too-distant future, I don't think will change the future for them very much at all.
The Bush administration's more tolerant antitrust stance is one reason most analysts now believe a settlement is inevitable. But some legal experts say the ruling that Microsoft is a monopoly could leave the company vulnerable to private lawsuits from its competitors. Dan?
Anthony Mason, thanks. A short time ago, I spoke with Microsoft chairman Bill Gates and asked what is the most important thing to him in today's ruling.
The thing that's most important to us is the ability to innovate, to add new features that customers are asking for. That was always at the heart of the case for us, and here the principles the appeals court set forward are very much in favor of innovation.
But as you innovated, the appeals court confirmed today you were breaking the law. What assurance does the court, the people of the United States have, that you're not still breaking the law and you won't continue to do it with antitrust policies?
Well, the issues there were related to our licensing practices. And as I've said, most of those are in the past. Those were things that are no longer in any of our contracts.
So you've changed that?
We've changed most of that, and all those other things we'll certainly be making a hard review of as we go through this decision.
You expect a settlement now?
I don't know if I expect it. I know that Microsoft throughout the case has wanted to avoid further litigation.
The lower court judge called you, among other things, a person with a, quote, Napoleonic complex, said you were arrogant. Now, given this court decision, do you feel vindicated? How do you feel?
Well, I don't know if he actually made those comments. No comments like that were made in the courtroom. The appeals court judges, looking at the articles that were written about interviews that he gave outside of the courtroom, decided that was inappropriate behavior. And so that's really up to them to decide, not for me to comment on. They decided that he should not be part of the case going forward.
Bill Gates, thank you very much.
Thank you.
The world's other top story tonight, the handover of former Yugoslav dictator Slobodan Milosevic to the International War Crimes Tribunal. This is unprecedented, a country willingly submitting its former leader to the World Court's judgment. And it is a vivid warning to other leaders that they can no longer rely on the fog of war to blur the line between combat and genocide. After months in a Belgrade jail, Milosevic now must get used to a new cell in the Netherlands. CBS's Richard Roth begins our coverage in The Hague. Richard?
Dan, Milosevic arrived here in The Hague just around midnight local time. He is the first serving former head of state to have been indicted for war crimes while still in office, and now he's the first former president to face trial before the UN's War Crimes Tribunal here. In Belgrade tonight, his supporters were on the street and angry. He was the strong man who'd promised them a greater Serbia, and some stuck with him to the very end on what became a long and bloody trail. Milosevic presided over a decade of civil wars in the former Yugoslav republics of Slovenia, Croatia, and Bosnia. But the indictment that finally brought him into UN custody is for alleged atrocities during the war in Kosovo. He stands accused of crimes against humanity for attempting to ethnically cleanse the province by massacring or expelling Kosovo's Albanian population. The indictment says Milosevic, as president of Yugoslavia and supreme commander of its army, orchestrated the waves of human misery that turned thousands of people into refugees and Kosovo into a killing ground. But when he was forcibly arrested 3 months ago in Belgrade, the charges were embezzlement and abuse of power. Belgrade's new democratic government said it wanted Milosevic to stand trial at home, and his lawyers today even briefly celebrated when Yugoslavia's constitutional court said the former president could not be extradited. In the end, the Yugoslav government overruled that decision. Despite the protests of his hardcore supporters, majority opinion in Belgrade had turned against Milosevic, and the government knew it. Yugoslav authorities also recognized Washington and Western Europe meant it when they warned $1 billion in desperately needed financial aid could be frozen unless Milosevic was turned over by tomorrow. Now, a trial many expected would never occur could begin within the next 6 months here. Dan?
Richard Roth in The Hague. There's a great deal more at stake in the Milosevic case than simply bringing an accused war criminal to trial. There is the enormous burden of history that weighs so heavily on the peoples of the Balkans in general, and as CBS's Jim Stewart explains, the Serbs in particular.
It was no coincidence, say many observers, that the Serbs chose today of all days to hand over their former president to world justice. It was on this day 87 years ago, after all, that a Serbian national assassinated Archduke Ferdinand, an event which signaled the start of World War I. Now, say experts, reformers in Serbia hope to wipe the slate clean by not only ridding themselves of another accused murderer, but by rejoining the community of nations and abiding by the rule of law.
It opens the door, too, to completing the transition and ridding Yugoslavia of the remnants of the old regime, which are still very much in place.
The tribunal awaiting Milosevic has limited jurisdiction and will only be examining crimes against humanity in the Kosovo campaign. But the fact that it will judge the former Serb president at all is a powerful signal, one that other despotic world leaders are sure not to miss.
Heads of state are now on notice, if they weren't before, that they might be held accountable, if not by their own people, then by an international court or by a court of another country.
And as if the evidence against him weren't compelling enough already, Serbian authorities announced today that they had uncovered yet another mass grave of ethnic Albanians from Kosovo, and the site, they say, has been traced to Slobodan Milosevic. Jim Stewart, CBS News, Washington.
The Bush administration is denying any change in its Middle East policy after Secretary of State Colin Powell made a surprise reference to observers, sometimes monitoring Israel and the Palestinians. Powell and Israeli Prime Minister Ariel Sharon agreed on a ceasefire timetable, saying it could begin after 7 days of relative calm. Sharon dismissed the idea of bringing in any observers. Powell had raised that idea earlier in a meeting with Palestinian leader Yasser Arafat. As for President Bush's domestic agenda, the president tried today to revive support for his energy plan. CBS's John Roberts reports why that may now be an even tougher sell than it was before.
Gasoline prices came down again today, now off 10% from their Memorial Day peak to an average $1.55 a gallon. Adding to the good news, word from the oil industry that there is no fundamental energy shortage.
Demand continues to rise, but there is no physical shortage of oil or gas.
The pronouncement seemed to take the urgency off the energy plan President Bush sent to Congress today. But Mr. Bush was undeterred, meeting House and Senate energy leaders at the White House, earlier pressing his case to the American people.
It's about time an administration came up and told the truth to the American people and laid out a common sense agenda to make sure the great future of this country is as bright as it possibly can be.
Republicans will launch an aggressive pitch to sell the president's plan. They'll go into the July 4th break armed with briefing books, CD-ROM presentations, and energy talking points. House Majority Whip Tom DeLay is leading the district-by-district marketing campaign.
We're not trying to ignore the national media, but we're going to bypass them. We're going to go straight to the American people.
GOP leaders have promised the Bush energy plan will get swift passage in the Republican House next month, and today criticized Democrats in the Senate for deliberately dragging their feet.
The security of our standard of living is at stake.
Democrats counter that the president hasn't sent them a bill to consider, only a broad outline of some ideas. They do say that they'll draft their own measure but won't get it to the Senate floor until at least September. Dan?
John Roberts at the White House. There's a follow-up tonight to CBS News investigations into possible market manipulation in the energy business to maximize profits. This could be a remarkable case in point. One-time Republican presidential candidate, TV evangelist, and entrepreneur Pat Robertson says, just listen what happened to him. CBS's Wyatt Andrews did and has the story for you.
To Pat Robertson, this small California oil refinery was a long-range investment. He planned to upgrade it to clean fuel standards and sell the gasoline to independent stations. Now, Robertson charges a big oil company, which he refused to name, has stalled his project by killing his bank loan.
This bank was approached by a large multi-billion-dollar oil company who said, if you finance the Senco Powerine startup, we will withdraw our business from the bank.
If that information is accurate, why would Big Oil care? Senator Ron Wyden, who today appeared with Robertson, says Big Oil is restricting all refinery output to keep gasoline prices high.
Anti-competitive forces, not environmental protections, are what stand in the way of this refinery.
2 weeks ago, Wyden released this document showing that Mobil Oil was concerned about that very refinery before Robertson owned it. We would all like to see Powerine stay down, the memo read. The impact could be 2 to 3 cents per gallon. The company, now ExxonMobil, has denied the senator's charges. It says that 2 to 3 cents was the market value if Powerine won a requested exemption to clean fuel standards. The big oil companies also deny they are restricting supply. The industry points out that gasoline production has set records for the last 11 weeks.
I feel sort of like David up against Goliath.
An unlikely David, but still, Pat Robertson, one of the country's most well-connected citizens, is saying he can't get a loan to make gasoline. Wyatt Andrews, CBS News, Washington.
Still ahead on the CBS Evening News, more accusations against former first brother Roger Clinton. And a man who made us laugh in an odd way, the passing of Jack Lemmon. There was a big win for the tobacco industry today. In the U.S. Supreme Court, the justices ruled states may not ban outdoor advertising for cigarettes near schools and playgrounds. Also today, a ruling on immigrants' rights. The Supreme Court justices said the federal government may not indefinitely detain lawful immigrants convicted of crimes just because their home countries won't take them back. Congressional investigators and headlines are focusing again now on Roger Clinton in the continuing political fallout over President Clinton's last-minute decisions on pardons. Among the latest questions, how and why a pardon was considered for convicted heroin trafficker Rosario Gambino after Gambino family members gave money to Roger Clinton. CBS's Bob Schieffer is on Capitol Hill to put this in context for you. Bob, what's going on here?
Well, Dan, Roger Clinton's lawyer Bart Williams says all this was just an attempt by Republicans in Congress to embarrass the Clinton family.
He confirms that Roger Clinton once tried to get the elder Gambino parole from prison and that he got $50,000 from the Gambino children. But he says there was no connection and he never tried to get him a presidential pardon. According to a committee letter we have obtained, the investigation goes beyond just that payment. Investigators have also asked Clinton to explain how $250,000 in traveler's checks purchased in Taiwan and Venezuela turned up in his bank account.
Now, Clinton attorney Williams had no specifics on that, but he says he is satisfied that that money was just payments that Roger Clinton received for performing with his traveling band. He said Roger Clinton would never ask for money to seek pardons. Dan.
Bob Schieffer. On another continuing post-election political dispute, Florida Secretary of State, Republican Katherine Harris, said today that she might indeed run for Congress. This came the day after Harris blasted the U.S. Civil Rights Commission for being what she called arbitrary and selective, unquote, in a report that was critical of her role as Secretary of State in the last presidential election. Coming up on tonight's CBS Evening News, there was nothing odd about the Oscar-winning career of Jack Lemmon, dead at 76. A look at his life and work next.
Get off of my back!
An FDA advisory panel voted tonight to recommend more restrictions on who can donate blood to help reduce the risk to the U.S. from Europe's mad cow disease. Opponents say this could worsen blood shortages around the country by reducing the pool of possible donors. There was word from California today that one of America's favorite actors, Jack Lemmon, has died of cancer. Lemmon was 76 years old. As an actor, he was the American everyman. And that's what made him so exceptional up on the screen. He won his first Oscar as Ensign Pulver in Mr. Roberts.
Yes, sir.
And he not only won Oscars, he won America's heart as Felix Unger versus an Oscar, Oscar Madison, as played by Walter Matthau in The Odd Couple.
Now listen, why don't you just take a tranquilizer? Go to your room.
Lemmon was sizzling in Some Like It Hot.
I can think of a million things.
Chilling as he sank into alcoholism in Days of Wine and Roses, and heartbreaking as a failing businessman trying to live up to his ideals in Save the Tiger, his second Oscar-winning role.
Oh, don't you get cute with me, Rico. It's the wrong day. My God, you've got a short memory. Have you forgotten? I knew you when your name was Saul.
Off-screen, Lemmon's own ideals were clear. Told Save the Tiger had a budget of only $1 million, Lemmon cut his own pay to a union minimum $165 a week.
And I am thrilled.
Jack Lemmon is survived by his family and a celluloid legacy for the ages.
Cold glass of beer for Roy. Thank you. Where's your coaster? My what? Coaster.
First Cal Ripken Jr. and now Tony Gwynn, certain future Baseball Hall of Famers hanging up their cleats. Gwynn said today this season, his 20th, all with the San Diego Padres, is his swan song. Gwynn is an 8-time batting champion with more than 3,100 hits. His lifetime average of .338 is second only to Ted Williams since World War II. Updating now tonight's headline stories. A federal appeals court rejected the order to break up Microsoft and rebuked the judge who issued that order for seeming bias against the software giant. Microsoft is still in violation of federal antitrust laws. A new judge is to get the case. And former Yugoslavian President Slobodan Milosevic has been turned over to the International War Crimes Tribunal in the Netherlands. He will be tried for the mass murder of ethnic Albanians during the Kosovo War. And that's part of our world tonight. Now here's Aaron Moriarty with a preview of tonight's edition of 48 Hours.
Meet a wealthy author with a notorious family name.
What was it like growing up a Gotti? Disciplined.
Her father is convicted mob boss John Gotti. Can she write a new chapter in a dark family history? Later on 48 Hours.
48 Hours is on tonight at 9 Central. For the CBS Evening News, Dan Rather reporting. Have a good evening. I'll see you again soon on 48 Hours.
For news 24 hours a day, CBS.com on the internet and on our interactive partner, America Online, at keyword CBS News.
This is CBS.